We've all wanted to tell our bosses exactly what we think of them at some time or another. We see it all the time in movies and on social media, inventive ways people quit their jobs in spectacular fashion, making dramatic exits with no repercussions. But in reality, how you leave a job can have huge consequences on your career moving forward. Melbourne HR specialist Karen Gately, founder of Corporate Dojo, says that the risks of taking a dramatic approach to resigning shouldn't be underestimated. As tempting as it may be to deliver a big up yours statement on the way out of the door, Karen says you need to think carefully about before doing anything drastic and consider what outcomes you want to achieve and whether your actions are likely to help you to achieve them. Karen says that resigning well will allow you to maintain professional credibility and relationships. And she joins us today. Welcome to Taking Care of Business, Karen.
Thank you for having me.
So why do we need to consider how we resign?
Well, look, I think the big issue here is actually around reputation. And, I think sometimes people can forget how long our reputation can stick with us, So how we choose to behave can still come up and cause consequences or outcomes or implications for us, many years down the track. So, again, it might feel good in the moment, but what's it going to mean for us, later on when we want a new opportunity?
Is there ever a mental health aspect to telling people to shove their job up the clacker? Because I know it certainly feels good, particularly if it's been a job that's been bad to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there is definite truth in, feeling heard, feeling like you've had a voice and that you have been able to stand up for yourself and make a difference if you are in a poor job environment. Again, you can have that conversation, you can have that impact, but it's the way you go about it that's going to dictate whether or not it serves you well or not. So being really constructive, being really honest, being, really firm and tough in the stance that you take is, if it's appropriate, that's fine. But again, how do you behave? Does that leave people feeling that you're actually as bad as the other party, or does it leave people thinking that you're immature in the way you deal with difficult issues, as an example?
So how should you tell a company that you're leaving? Is it best to have a conversation before you put a letter on somebody's desk?
Yeah, again, it's about remembering that trust and respect are the foundations of any successful relationship. And even if you've had a difficult working relationship, maintaining your own standard at behaviour at a standard that you can be proud of, that can't come back at you. So most people would expect that, that conversation is the courteous way to go. Giving people heads up before you announce it to the rest of the organisation, let alone the external world. Sometimes it's not always practical to have that face-to-face conversation for whatever reason, but wherever possible, I think, letting your direct report manager know in the first instance is usually the way to go. Obviously, if they are a massive issue for you, then it might be appropriate to go to their boss or to go to an HR person. But again, having that conversation is typically going to be seen as professional and polite.
No, that's a great advice that you can submit your resignation and talk to somebody that's not your direct manager if you're having problems with them. That's wonderful advice. Thank you. Should you tell the company why you're leaving?
Again, it depends on the impact you want to have. In most circumstances, I would argue yes, that, if you speak the truth and you help them to understand their reality of what, their working conditions are like, they're more likely to be able to learn from that, improve. So there might be colleagues, for example, that you still care about and would like to see them have a healthier time or, a more positive time in that environment. So, again, I don't want to sound naive, but not every employer actually wants to hear it, is willingly going to take that on board and improve from it. But, I think where there is an opportunity to help them to understand what can improve, then I think we should take it.
Do you have any obligation to, once you've left, do you have any obligation to help them with anything? I've had previous employers phone me even several years later asking, do you remember about this thing, or do you know where that was put?
Again, when we value relationships, we get a call from a former colleague, even a former manager, doesn't take much time or energy to support them or to help them out, then in most circumstances, again, that just makes sense. Because, we never know when we're going to turn up in the same place again with some of our former colleagues. I've heard some hilarious stories of people, blowing up one opportunity only to turn up in a new environment, and, one of the people that they've really offended turns up as their new boss. So again, wherever, there's not an obligation to answer your question more directly, but again, it makes sense that, if you're willing to be giving or you're generous in your spirit, you're entirely more likely to receive that in return from people.
So what do we need to consider when we're resigning, Karen?
Well, as we've been talking about, it really is understand the consequences, understand the impact that you want to have, and then go about it in a way that's going to reflect well on you. Again, as we've talked about, being discreet, giving people the opportunity to understand your concerns is a good place to start. And most of all, I would really encourage people just to be really considered and deliberate. You might be feeling emotional, you might be feeling really wound up about something, but again, taking some time to breathe, take a breath, and really think about how you're now going to respond and whether or not an emotional reaction is necessarily going to be a helpful one.
You also mentioned keeping calm, and sometimes that's not that easy to do. It depends why you're leaving a business. Do you have any top tips on how to keep calm?
Yeah, again, it's, for most people about giving yourself some time to actually step back, think, reflect, understand what is it that I want to say, why do I want to say that, what outcome do I want to actually drive here, and having a really clear focus on, what you actually want to leave in terms of the impression or the impact is going to help you to at least slow down enough to be thoughtful about the way you choose your words and the way, obviously, that emotion is expressed. Sometimes it makes sense to go for a walk. Sometimes it makes sense to take some time out in terms of, a few days to really think about the conversation you want to have. Sometimes it makes sense to tap into a mentor or somebody that can help you to get some perspective, process the emotion before you then go and have the rational conversation. So, it's about understanding yourself and what really triggers you, what really upsets you, and what is going to help you to actually put those things in their place and allow you to respond, as I said, rationally.
So we'll also talk about being discreet about resigning.
Yeah, and, being discreet, it really, again, is what we were talking about earlier. And, there's, yes, you can announce to the whole world that you're going to go and resign on Facebook and let your boss find out that way. But, again, it's not necessarily going to serve you well. So, again, it's in most cases, it's going to be better received if you at least give the people private opportunity to respond and to understand the issues, especially if you've never had a conversation about your concerns. And it's important to remember that, other people, colleagues, peers, don't necessarily respond well to people airing their dirty laundry. People may not share your views. And again, going very public with that creates a risk that, even within that peer group, you may undermine your own credibility.
Should you prepare your work circumstances, get everything ready, all ready to hand over before you hand in your notice?
Not necessarily. It really depends on whether or not there's going to be a notice period and whether or not there's opportunity for you to help your employer to transition your task to the next person. So again, if it's likely you're going to be walking away straight away, it's likely your employer is going to ask you to leave straight away because that might be part of your industry, standard practices. And there are things that you want to make sure land effectively once you're gone, then again, that's only going to serve be positive for your reputation, that you have actually cared enough to leave things in a good state. In most circumstances, hopefully there is a bit of a notice period where you will have that time to tidy up and finish things off. But obviously just use your judgment about what they're going to look like for you to walk away from some things that might fall over and what steps do you need to take to make sure that's not the case.
What about taking any holidays that are owed to you? Should you try and tidy that up before you hand in your notice?
Well, again, it's very much depending on what your leave balance is. Some employers are keen for you to do that. Others are happy just to pay out that annual leave entitlement as part of your separation payment. So again, I would be fair, again, assuming the circumstances aren't, for example, relating to bullying or anything, really negative in that regard, assuming there is somewhat of a healthy relationship that is given, priority.
Now, what about on the other hand, if you have been asked to leave, is there anything that you can do to be more professional in that instance?
Well, I think in that instance it starts with understanding why you've been asked to leave, and hopefully you've been treated lawfully as a starting point, and you've been given fair and reasonable opportunity to understand those issues. If you understand why, then it's really about taking ownership for the part that is appropriate for you too. So in other words, if you've really struggled to deliver and you just haven't been up to the job because you haven't had the level of skill you thought that you would have going into the role, then it's about taking ownership for that outcome. The employment relationship is a two-way street. If you feel it's an unfair decision, then obviously that's an incredibly difficult scenario to maintain, again, that composure and that calm approach. So I think, again, it's about being honest about how you feel, but recognising that your words will have an impact and will potentially stick. So again, you might need to take some time to reflect on the decision that's been made, seek legal advice if that's appropriate, and request a follow-up meeting after you've gone.
Wonderful. I think we've covered it. Have we covered it all, Karen?
I think we have. I guess the keynote here is, there's lots of examples of people doing it in spectacular fashion, and whilst it might be funny for the rest of us to read, online, but really think about whether or not you want to be that news story in 10 years from now.
And I guess for us, particularly in Perth, it's such a small city, and if you're in an industry, then you will see the same people in that industry all the time. So it's probably particularly pertinent over here on the West Coast.
That's right. Look, there's lots of markets I work in where that's entirely true. And even in big cities, industries can be small. And absolutely, you cross those paths, so really give that some thought.
Thank you so much. Melbourne HR specialist Karen Gately, founder of Corporate Dojo, talking about how to resign with poise and to keep your career intact. Thank you so much for joining us, Karen.
Thanks for having me.